No, start at the very beginning when he talks about it.
Great lyrics that Hal David wrote. This lyric, and when I think about Alfie, what a lyric. One of the best lyrics anybody ever wrote in anybody's lifetime. Stevie did it. But this song, such an important lyrical thought. Lord, we don't need another mountain. There are mountains and hillsides enough to climb. There are oceans and rivers enough to last till the end of time. The world needs that same love. It's the only thing that's just still alive. The world needs now. It's love, sweet love. It's the only thing that's just still alive. The world needs now. It's love, sweet love. No, not just console. Just for everyone.
Thank you, everybody. God bless you. God bless America.
Good evening and welcome. We're Sandy and Tom Farley. We're your hosts. And in Zoom speak, that means we can mute you. Let's see. South Bay storytellers and listeners, in cooperation with the Storytelling Association of California
and the National Storytelling Network,
is happy to bring you our 29th consecutive Tellabration. Our theme tonight, what the world needs now. We've got a great lineup of 9 tellers. So we'll start with our favorite warm-up piece, The Owl and the Pussycat.
The owl
And the pussycat
went to sea in a beautiful pea-green boat.
They took some honey and plenty of money wrapped up in a 5-pound note.
The owl looked up at the stars above and sang to a small guitar. Oh, puss, my love, what a beautiful puss you are. You are. What a beautiful puss you are.
Said the cat to the owl, you elegant fowl, how charmingly sweet you sing. Oh, let us be married. Too long we have tarried. But what shall we do for a ring?
Well, they sailed away for a year and a day to the land where the bong tree grows. And there in a wood, a piggy wig stood with a ring in the end of his nose.
His nose?
His nose.
With a ring in the end of his nose.
Dear pig, are you willing to sell for 1 shilling your ring?
Said the piggy, I will.
So they took it away and were married next day by the turkey who lives on the hill.
They dined on mince and slices of quince, which they ate with a runcible spoon. And hand in hand by the edge of the sand, they danced in the light of the moon.
The moon, the moon.
They danced in the light of the moon. Thank you. Joyce Swift is next up is Anushka Shetty. She's one of the young tellers whom Joy has mentored. She has told in museums, schools, and libraries when adult leadership ebbed in Los Altos. She took on the producing and emceeing the storytelling festival at the Los Altos Library when she was in the 11th grade. She'll be graduating from high school in June, but tonight she's telling us an African folk tale, Anansi and the Sky Kingdom. Anushka Shetty.
Thank you, Sandy, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Anushka, and I will be telling Anansi and the Sky Kingdom. Long ago, the world was dark without any light. The poor animals couldn't hunt or even see their children. King Lion called to the animals, "Who will go to the king of the sky and ask for light?" Eagle shouted, "I can fly the highest." "I can go." And off he went into the clouds, but he couldn't fly high enough. Monkey chattered, "I can climb into the sky." And he tried. Off he went into the trees, but he couldn't climb high enough. All of the animals tried, but all of them failed. Finally, Anansi the spider came forward and said, "I can spin a web into the sky." "You?" said the king lion. "Anansi, you are too little." "I may be tiny," Anansi replied, "but my friends and I can do anything if we work together." Ha ha ha, ha ha ha. The animals laughed, but King Lion roared, "We shall see what Anansi and his friends can do." Anansi called out to his friends, "Ant, fly, let's go." Anansi began to weave a web from the earth. It stretched high into the clouds. "Ant, you and I, we will climb up the web and Fly will join us. You can then bite an opening into the Sky Kingdom," Anansi explained. And up they went, chicka-boom, 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 until they reached the clouds. Crunch! Ant chewed an opening into the clouds, and the three friends crawled into the Sky Kingdom. They were surrounded by bright lights and beautiful colors. Suddenly, the king of the sky stood in front of them. "What do you want from here?" the king demanded. We have come for light, king," said Anansi. "Will you please share it with the earth below?" "We will share, but first you must prove that you are worthy. You must first pass 3 tests." "We can pass any tests," bragged Anansi. "Tell us what to do." "Stay right here," said the king. "My wise men and I will prepare the 3 tests." The king and his wise men went into a golden tent. "Oh, how I wish I could be a fly on the wall of that tent," Anansi said. "I can be a fly on the wall," said Fly, and he zipped into the tent to listen. Fly came back after listening. "Anansi, they're going to ask us to cut down every blade of grass in that huge field over there before sunrise tomorrow," Fly cried, showing them an area the size of a football field. "It's impossible," cried Fly. "Well, the 3 of us can't do it, but Ant's family can," Anansi said. "Yes, my family can cut down every blade of grass," Ant said, and he ran down Anansi's web to get his mother, his father, his 72 sisters, and his 82 brothers, and all his cousins and his aunts and uncles. Chomp, 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 crunch, crunch, crunch. Every blade of grass was cut, and all of the ants had slid back down the web when the sun came up the next day. "Huh," the king huffed. "Well, that was the easiest test. We shall prepare the next test." Fly followed the king back once again and his wise men into the tent, and soon Fly zoomed out, back out of the tent. "Oh no, Anansi," he cried. "We must eat all of the fruit on the trees by the next morning." As he showed them the thousands of fruit trees, We're doomed. The three of us can't do it. But Fly's family sure can, Anansi said. Go in and invite them to a feast. Fly flew down back to earth and brought his hungry family up to the orchard. Thousands of flies swarmed the empty trees, and all of the fruit was gone. The king was furious when he saw. You must still pass our last test. And he went back into the golden tent. They will ask us to choose a box, Fly said. Choose the gray one, Anansi. The king came out holding 2 boxes. One was a beautiful, big, bright yellow box, and the other was a small gray box. This is the final test. If you choose correctly, the light is yours, said the king, and he held out the 2 boxes. Anansi looked at the boxes. He sniffed them, and then he flipped them, and at last he pointed to the gray box. That box, he yelled, that's the one I choose. The king was enraged. Take it and go, he shouted. Anansi, Ant, and Fly grabbed the box and rushed down the web. When they reached the earth, King Lion lifted the top of the box, and out came a rooster. The rooster then puffed up out his chest and crowed for the first time. Cock-a-doodle-doo! And the sun rose brightly into the sky. Anansi, Ant, and Fly said proudly, when we work together, we can do anything. Thank you.
Oh, Anushka, what a wonderful lesson that is. Beautifully told.
Thank you.
Okay, Trisha Shetty is next. Trisha Shetty is Anushka's younger sister, and she has not stayed in her sister's shadow, but developed her own vibrant style of telling. Trisha is in the 8th grade and already an experienced teller and actor. She'll be telling an Indian folktale, The Drum. Trisha Shetty.
Hello, everyone. So today, like Sandy said, I will be telling a folktale from India called The Little Drummer. A long time ago, there lived a poor woman and her son. They had a hard life, but they had each other, and that's all that mattered. And the boy, he didn't have many clothes, nor that many toys, but he didn't mind. One day, the mother walked up to the boy and said, "Son, today I am going to the market to sell the grains that we harvested. Is there anything you want from the market?" The boy thought, Oh, I know we can't afford this, but I've always wanted a drum. The mother sighed. "Oh, son, no, we cannot afford it. And because the money we get from selling the grains is not enough to buy those things. We can only buy necessary things with that money." The boy said, "Okay, it's okay, mother." And the mother went to the market and sold the grains, and while she was walking home from the market, she was thinking about her poor son and how she couldn't grant his only wish. She started to cry. She felt so bad. She wept and cried, and she almost ran into a strange man that was sitting on the village path. "What's wrong?" said the strange man. "Oh," the mother explained, "well, my son, he wants a drum, but I can't grant his wish. And this is the only thing he's ever asked for, and I feel so bad." The man thought. Then he took out a stick. This stick has some magic in it, and I think your son will like this stick." The mother took the stick, and she went to her hut, and she gave the stick to her son and said, "I got this stick from a strange man, and he said this stick has some magic in it, and I think you will like it." The boy happily took the stick and started to play with it, and then he went for a walk along the village path. While he was walking, he came across an old lady. She was surrounded by smoke, and he could see that she was struggling. "What's wrong?" said the boy. "Oh," said the old lady, "I'm trying to cook this bread, but I cannot start a fire." The boy thought for a moment. "I have this magical stick," he said. "I think it has enough magic for you to start a fire." The lady took the stick and she started a fire. And she cooked her bread and she said, "Thank you, young man. You have helped me, so in return, I will hand you this bread that I cooked." The boy took the bread and then went down along the village path, and he later came across the potmaker's wife, and she was carrying her baby, and she was trying to pacify the baby who was crying. "What's wrong?" said the boy. "Oh, well, my baby won't stop crying." The boy thought for a second, then gave the woman the bread that he had got from the cook. He gave the baby the bread, and the baby ate the bread and stopped crying. "Wow, I guess he was hungry after all," said the wife. Then, in return, the wife gave the boy a pot that she had. The boy took the pot and then went along the village path. While he was walking, he heard some arguing and saw a couple arguing. "What's all the fuss?" the boy asked. The husband said, "Well, I am a washerman, and my wife has just broken the only pot that we have, so now I can't wash the clothes." The boy looked at his pot and then gave the pot to the washerman and his wife. "Thank you so much, young man." And in return, the washerman went through the clothes he had and picked out a coat. He gave the coat to the boy, and the boy put it on and said thank you and walked down the path. While he was walking, later he came across a man that was standing beside his horse in front of a lake. The man was shivering, and he was only wearing a pair of shorts. "What's wrong?" asked the boy. "Well, you see," said the man, "I went to this lake to wash myself, and I put my clothes in this pile over there. While I was taking a bath in the lake, a thief came on a horse, and he took all of my clothes and went off, leaving his horse behind." The boy thought for a moment. He could see that the man was struggling to stay warm. So he took off the coat that he was wearing and gave it to the man. The man put on the coat, and he stopped shivering and stopped coughing. "Thank you so much, young sir. You have helped me a lot." He looked at his horse that was beside him and said, "Well, I won't need this horse, so you can take it." The boy leapt on the horse and rode down along the village path. While he was riding, he came across a group of people. They were sitting under a tree. He saw a bride and a groom in the group and assumed it was a wedding. He also saw some musicians and some other people who he assumed were guests. However, there was no music, nor chatter, nor laughter. The people looked very unhappy. "Why are you all so unhappy?" the boy asked. "Well," said one of the people in the group, for our weddings, we do a ritual at the end of the ceremony, and the groom has to ride on a horse across a bridge, that bridge over there. We ordered a horse, but the horse didn't come, so now how are we supposed to finish the wedding?" The boy looked at his horse and said, "Well, you can have this horse. I won't be needing it any longer." And the people took the horse and the groom rode on it. And the people said, "Thank you so much." They turned around and huddled in a circle, and they spoke to one of the musicians, and then they turned around back to the boy and they handed him a drum. The boy took it and he said, "Thank you so much. This is all I've ever wished for. I've always wanted a little drum." And he took it and he skipped home. He ran as fast as he could, and he went back to his hut. He told his mom, "Look what I got. I got a drum." And he started to play it. And they danced around the hut. And the boy said, "Well, maybe that stick had some magic in it after all." The end. Thank you.
Oh, that was delightful, Tricia. Tricia Shetty, thank you so much. Our next teller is Jim Cockrell, known to us as JC. He's an engineer, outdoorsman, and devoted teller. For some 20 years, he's organized the Big Basin Storytelling Festival, which brought storytellers from South Bay and Santa Cruz to the park's amphitheater every year in the last weekend of July. Sadly, that facility burned down this summer. But JC is with us tonight, retelling an old story by Jean Giono.
Thank you, Sandy, for the introduction. Can you hear my audio okay? Thank you for the introduction, Sandy. Where should I begin my story? How about at the beginning? I was a young man. That's not too far-fetched. It was 40 years ago. The year was 1913. And I had set out on a long walking tour in that part of Provence where the Alps jut down into the plains. It was a dry, desolate, barren area where tourists never go. The farther I ascended, the more deserted and barren it was. Nothing grew there but patches of wild grasses, brown everywhere. An incessant desiccating wind blew, and I had run completely out of water after 3 days. There were dry stream beds where archaeologists tell you that they found fishhooks from Roman times, but these have been dry for generations. I ascended higher into the hills and came to a deserted village. There were 4 or 5 abandoned, dilapidated houses, and the village well was dry too. So I was forced to continue further 4 or 5 more hours, and I saw on a rise what I took to be a tree stump. But as I got closer, I realized it was a shepherd tending his flock. The shepherd shared with me some water from his gourd, and he invited me to his house to share his evening meal. It was a stone cottage that he had built himself, and he had an excellent hand-built well there too. The cottage was tidy and well kept, as was the appearance of the shepherd himself. He shared an excellent homemade soup, simple but tasty, and afterwards I offered him a smoke of my tobacco, which he refused. So I sat back and watched as the shepherd retrieved a sack from a shelf and emptied the contents on his table. They were acorns. And I watched as the shepherd very deliberately inspect each acorn. He seemed to select the largest and perfect acorns and arrange them in 10 piles of 10 acorns each. And when he was finished, he cast aside the discards and put the perfect acorns back into his sack. Well, the shepherd made it understood I was welcome to spend the night there with him. And to be honest, I could use the rest, and I knew the villages in these areas. The nearest village would be more than a day's walk away. And the people there were stingy, mean, inhospitable people. They made their living scratching what they could from the soil or trapping animals. But in contrast, the shepherd's cottage was welcoming and peaceful. In the morning, I didn't have much to do, so I decided to follow the shepherd on his rounds with his sheep, and he gathered his dog and his walking stick and that sack of acorns. And at the midday meal, I accompanied the shepherd up to another hill where he took his staff, which was made of iron, and created a depression in the soil. In the hole, he carefully placed one of the acorns, watered it, and deliberately covered it with soil. He was planting oak trees. I watched as he planted the remaining 100 acorns, and I asked him about this. He said, in 3 years, he had planted 100,000 acorns. Now of these, 20,000 sprouted, and half of those were taken by rodents or other mishap. So today, where there had been nothing growing before, there were now 10,000 oak trees. The shepherd was a reluctant man to talk, but he carried himself with a very self-assured way. But I was insistent on my questions. He told me his name was Elziard Bouffier. He had been a farmer in the flatlands, but after his wife and daughter died in an accident, he had retreated to this barren country for isolation. And it seemed to him that the tortured land was wanting for trees. So he took it upon himself to begin his methodical planting. I said, well, in 3 years' time, in 10 years' time, your 10,000 oak trees are going to be quite the forest. He said, in 10 years' time, if the Lord was willing, this would just be a drop in the bucket. He intended to continue his planting. Not only that, but he was studying the propagation of beeches and birches and thought they might grow in the valleys where he thought there might be water under the surface. Well, the next day I departed. And the following year came the War of 1914, in which I was occupied for 5 years. After the war, I found myself in possession of discharged and in possession of a small bonus and a great desire to breathe fresh air. So I returned to that country again. And it was just as I had left it in 1913, barren, dry. And when I got to that deserted village, it was as before. But there on the rise above it was a row of trees that was not there before. And I ascended to that forest, and the oak trees that the shepherd had planted 10 years before were now 10 feet above my head. And the shepherd escorted me through his forest, now 3 kilometers wide and over 11 kilometers long. I was astonished that one man had transformed this entire country with no mechanization, just using his 2 hands. And not only that, but there was water running in the streams. They were fed by rain and snow that was retained by the forest. And the wind was still there, but it blew seeds into the riparian corridor. And those seeds had sprouted ferns and rushes and willows. It was an amazing transformation. This one man had transformed a formerly barren desert into a Garden of Eden. And he showed me, sure enough, there in the ravines, his beeches and birches were growing just as he had said. A few years later, in 1935, a delegation from the French National Forestry Department set an expedition up to inspect this naturally occurring forest where there had not been one before. And they stood around among themselves, the foresters, and they talked ineffectually about the succession of species and conservation practices and under whose department this should belong. And fortunately, after all their talk, nothing came of it. At best, they decided to consider it a preserve, and they outlawed the poachers who were harvesting charcoal. I knew about this because one of the foresters was my friend, and I told him, I will take him to show him the mystery of the origin of this mysterious forest. So a week later, I escorted him to meet Elzéar Bouffier. And we sat there on a carpet of moss with Bouffier, enjoying our lunch. And Elzéar by now had completely lost his power of speech. He found no need to talk to anyone in his lonely pursuits. And my friend, the forester, and I were so smitten by the enchantment of this forest. We sat there in silence ourselves. And we listened as a moisture-laden wind blew through the branches over our head. It sounded like waves on the ocean. Afterwards, my friend, the forester, confided later that he was tempted to give Bouffier some pointers on certain species that would well suited for the soil types and so on. But then he thought better of it because he realized that this shepherd knew more about it than he did, probably more than anyone did. Well, a few years later came the War of 1949. Bouffier ignored this war just as he had the War of 1914. He continued his peaceful planting, and now he was 45 kilometers away in a new house, farther away. He was now 75 years old. The last time I saw my friend Elzéar Bouffier was 1945. The war had just ended, and the country was just beginning to wake up and recover from the devastation. Only now there was a bus service up to that area. I rode the bus, and as we ascended up into the hills, I thought I was in the wrong place, where there had been barren, dry landscape. Now there were prosperous farms on the left and on the right, and green fields where streams had been channeled for irrigation, and orchards were planted. And when the bus dropped me off at that deserted village, I didn't recognize it except by its name. Where there had been a half a dozen dilapidated houses, people had moved in and cleared the rubble, and now there were newly built houses, freshly plastered and painted, and yards, and they had planted backyard gardens. And families had moved up from the plains. They found this an attractive place to live, and then an affordable place to live. And young couples had come, and now there were 3 or 4 families with children. And they had rebuilt the fountain. And the thing that struck me the most was in the village park, they had planted a linden tree. I continued the rest of my way on foot into that thick forest to meet my friend who was there peacefully planting as always. And it occurred to me, by my estimates, this village and the villages neighboring now had a population of some 10,000 people, 10,000 happy citizens that owed their happiness, blissfully unknown to them, to the selfless benevolence of this one unlearned shepherd. In 1947, Elziard Bouffier, at the age of 89, died peacefully in his sleep in the hospice in Benon. He was the man who planted trees. I'd like to tell a little, just to give a credit to the author, John Jono, who wrote that story. In 1953, his publisher rejected it. And so Jono gave that story away for free, and it's now been published around the world. And I recommend, if you're interested in it, there's an excellent version, an animated version that was produced by the Canadian Broadcasting Company, and you can find it on the internet. I recommend it. That was The Man Who Planted Trees. Thank you.
What the world needs now is trees, more trees.
That's for sure. That's for sure. My next one.
Becky Blythe, next chair over, is married to JC. We told the owl and the pussycat at their wedding, too long we have tarried, was appreciated. Becky is an outdoor person, forest firefighter, and history buff. She is told at the Santa Cruz Mission Museum, Big Basin State Park, and lots of our previous telebrations. Today she brings Written in Gold. Becky Blythe.
This is a take on a Cinderella story. The Cinderella story, as with many stories, traveled on trade routes. And as it went different places, the story changed to suit the temperament and culture for where it was being retold. And this is a Cinderella version from Thailand. White Lotus lived with her stepmother, Madame Bhagwan, and her stepsister, Rose. After her father had died, she understood that now her life was different. She would no longer have a big fluffy straw mat to sleep on at night and no longer have any new clothes. She was expected to go to the fish market every morning and get provisions and bring them back. She was expected to do all the housework. She would roast the spices and grind them by hand every day, and then make the rice and vegetables and fish. And when it was served at night on the table, Madame Bhagwan would take half the fish for herself and give the other half to Rose and push the platter with just the fish bones and fish head to Lotus. Lotus became very sad, and one night she was so sad that she took her plate and went out into the garden to sit on the steps and pick at the fish bones. While she sat there, she noticed how beautiful and silver the moon was, and the stars were a myriad of colors and glory. As she stood there admiring the night sky, she thought to herself, I may no longer have fine things in my life, but I have the moon and I have the stars. And somehow that comforted her. Rose made fun of her and said, you're so skinny. And look at you, you're as pale as the moon. And Madame Bhagwan said, you don't have time to sit here and admire the night sky. You should be doing the work. The pots need cleaning. So Rose took her plate of fish bones and walked further into the garden and buried the fish bones And as she buried them, she thought to herself, I am burying my sorrow here with these bones. And each night she did the same thing. She went back into the garden and buried the fish bones. This ceremonial practice actually began to make her feel better. And one night, she noticed that there was a sprout coming up where the bones were buried, a silvery bush of some sort. And it grew quickly. After just a few nights, there was a large bush, a silver bush with golden leaves. So beautiful was this that Lotus took one of the golden leaves and with her bamboo pen, she pressed her thoughts into the leaf. And then she tossed it up into the air and the wind took it away out of the garden. And she started to feel a lot more lighthearted and happy. She did this every night. She picked a leaf and began to write poetry on the leaves. And her thoughts of loneliness and longing, and her thoughts of wonder at the beauty of the world. And then she would toss them into the night sky and the wind would take them. Madame Bagwan and Rose did not even notice how much happier Lotus was. While she swept, she composed poetry. While she walked to the fish market, she had beautiful thoughts about the wonders of the world. Unbeknownst to the Bagwan family, the king of that realm, who had been a strong and well-loved man, suddenly died. His son was bedecked in robes and rushed to the throne, which he felt woefully unprepared for. He was given all the responsibilities of a king and expected to solve all the problems. It was overwhelming and stressful. He had advisors and courtiers, but it was not enough to take away the feeling of inadequacy. After the court had retired to bed, the king would go into the walled garden of the palace and think and look at the night sky and the moon. And one night, a gold leaf floated into the garden and he picked it up. To his surprise, it had a beautiful little passage on it. So he kept it. The next night, the same thing happened. Night after night, a gold leaf would land in the garden and he collected them and laid them out and looked at them. They were wonderful thoughts. It was a philosophy that he agreed with. And he finally showed them to one of his courtiers and said, who could be writing these? Who is this person? I want to meet this person. They seem to understand life. And the courtier looked at them carefully and said, not only is this person smart, but I believe it is the hand of a woman. So the king ordered everyone to search the kingdom for a gold leaf tree, which of course no one had ever heard of. So then he said, I will search every house that has a garden. And so they did. When he arrived at the Bagwan house, Madame Bagwan said, I'm sorry we don't have a gold leaf tree. But Rose had been in the backyard and came running in with a gold leaf in her hand and smiled at the king. The king smiled back and said, now tell me a poem. Rose said, my name is Rose. This leaf is yellow. You sure are a handsome fellow. The king smiled, but there was disappointment in his eyes. Peeking around the corner was Lotus, and the king saw her and beckoned her to come forward. And then he said to her, only wind and sky and clouds shall know. And she finished the poem. What heart inspires a leaf to show? And he said, it is you. And he took her hand, took her back to the palace, and they were soon married, and Lotus became the compassionate queen of the realm. And by her orders, Every morning at the market, a beautiful fish, the finest fish for that day, was chosen and brought to the Bhagwan house on a plate in the shape of a leaf with a poem. That's it.
Lovely. I've never heard that story before. Thank you, Becky. Our next teller is Dawn Wood, and she has pre-recorded this story for us to make sure that it was going to come out right. And Dawn Wood is a local girl. She graduated from San Jose State with a major in history and anthropology. What a great major for someone who loves folklore. Oh my. She also loves to travel, and she oftentimes shares her travel adventures with her family with our swap group. Dawn brings a unique style to telling of traditional tales so that you listen to them with new ears. Let us hear As Meat Loves Salt. This is also a variation on the Cinderella theme. Nice to have them one after the other. So, Dawn Wood.
Nope. Let me make sure I'm sound here. Aha, there.
This is the story As Meat Loves Salt. Once upon a time, there lived a king with his 3 daughters. Now, the first 2 were terrible, but the last one was his favorite. And being a prudent man, he decided he needed to make a will to figure out who would inherit his kingdom. And so he did. But the 2 oldest daughters heard about it, and they went to bribe the lawyer, and there was a big scandal, and the king heard about it, and he said, "That's it. I have had it. Forget the will. I'm going to decide who inherits American Idol style." And he did. He gathered his daughters together. He said, "How much do you love me?" And the oldest one said, "As much as the world." And the second one said, "As much as life itself." And he turned to his youngest daughter, his favorite, and he said, "How much do you love me?" And she said, "As much as meat loves salt." And the king thought, "That's so plain, that's so wrong." And he was pissed off. So he went to his faithful servant. He said, "Take my youngest daughter into the woods and kill her." So the servant took her out into the woods, but she begged and pleaded so for her life that his heart was touched and he just couldn't do it. So instead, he told her when she got to the town and went to the castle, she could get a good job there if she gave his name. He was a reference. And then he took her dress and he went there back to town and he went to the butcher shop and he got a deer's heart because he had to have proof to show her father. And this meant, of course, that the girl was running through the forest buck naked. This is rather inconvenient for her because it's bad enough being disinherited, having a hit put out on your life without being naked on top of it. That's a real problem. But being industrious, she soon figured out that she could weave a dress of moss and a cloak of leaves and another cloak of boards. I think she had all 3 because it's an excellent way to stay warm and dry in the forest. So she ate very well as well because all the birds and the bees literally heard that she was there, and being a decent person, they provided her with food and edible flowers, and she lived quite well. Now, many stories have it that when she came to the castle did not know who she was, and neither did her family when they saw her again. And it makes you wonder, why didn't they know who she was? This is why. She came to the outskirts of town, and there in the outskirts of town was the graveyard, because you just can't have your dead in town. It never turns out well. And there in the graveyard was the funeral of a 100-year-old woman. And after the funeral, she went to the gravedigger. She said, "Can I buy that old woman's skin from you?" And the gravedigger must have been used to odd requests like this, because he said, "Absolutely, but you must know there are two bonuses with this skin. The first is a magical wand. Now you wave this magical wand back and forth, and you can unzip the old woman's skin and step out of it. Now, the second thing you have to know about this old woman's skin is that it comes with a magical nut. Some stories say a magical box. Take that magical box, put it in the crook of that tree over there, and out will come magical clothing." And the girl said, "Thank you very much." She picked up the magical wand, stuck it in her bra. Being a bold woman, she could pull this off walking downtown. And where she shoved the magical box, no one knows. But she went off. I assumed that her clothing had no pockets. So she went off to town. She got a job at that castle when she mentioned the servant's name, and she became the castle's cook. And everyone at the castle knew, being 100 years old, when the party started at the castle, she was never going, she was so old. But what they didn't know is that every night, the girl would go out to the pond, wave the magical wand, unzip her old woman's skin, step out of it, and bathe in the pond. And one night, of course, the prince was out hunting at night, and he ran across her in the pond. And he didn't say, "Ah, there's an old woman's skin. I can steal it and bind her to me." No. He didn't know who she was, and he didn't see the old woman's skin. He just thought, "Ah, there's a lovely girl. I'd love to meet her." And the next day, he held a ball. Everyone came to the ball. And they all knew that the old woman who was the cook was so old she would never go. But what they didn't know is that the girl unzipped her old woman's skin at night and went to the magical tree. And she took the magical wand out of her bra, and she put it aside. And she went to the tree and she took out the magical box. And she put it in the crook of the tree, and out popped a wonderful dress. What color this dress was, nothing says, but it was a lovely dress. And she put it on, hid her things away, went back to the castle, and danced with the prince every night of the dance. Now, there were 3 nights to this dance, and the prince was in love. He thought this was wonderful. And every night the princess slipped away before he could declare how much he loved her, except for the last one. He gave her a ring. And he said, "If you don't marry me, I will die." But she slipped away anyway with the ring. And the next day, the prince took to his bed, and he told everyone that he would die if he could not marry this girl. And rather than telling him to suck it up and get back to work, they all agreed that he would die. And so the cook heard about this, and she went in the kitchen in her old woman's skin, and she made him barley gruel, because that's what they gave you when you were sick. They made you eat crap. And she went up the spiral staircase to the prince's room, carrying this barley gruel. And what he didn't know is that she had taken the ring that he'd given him, and she put it in his gruel. And so the prince ate the last of the barley gruel, scraping the side of the bowl, and he found the ring. And he wanted to know who had made the gruel, but she wouldn't tell him. He badgered her so much that she had to admit not only that she made the gruel, but who exactly she was. She was the girl that he had seen in the forest. And so he said, "I will marry you." And they set a wedding date. And as is traditional, they decided that they would have a grand party first, a nice wedding reception. Might as well get that over with first before the wedding. So they invited everyone from all around the kingdom. They invited her father, they invited her sisters, they invited the servant that helped her out in the woods, and they all went to the party. And the princess, in her old woman's skin, went to the kitchen and said, "Nothing for the feast shall be made with salt." And so it was. So The wedding guests came in. They said, oh, the house is decorated wonderfully. The seating arrangements are wonderful. This is so much fun. The food is awful. They all agreed it was the worst wedding reception they had ever been to. And so her father did what anyone would do if he went to a restaurant that good, to an event that good, and the food was bad. He summoned the cook. And out she came in her old woman's skin. And he started going off on how terrible the food was. And she listened to him. And he looked at her, and he looked in her eyes, and he realized that she was his daughter. And he knew exactly then just what she meant when she said, I love you as much as meat loves salt. And he started to cry. Now, some people say that the prince had lost his mind while she was gone, and that she nursed him back to health, or that he had been deserted by his older children. And some things say that she had her sisters driven naked into the woods as she had been driven naked, and or that they became old maids because that was the worst thing that could befall a woman at the time. But this all depends on how vindictive you want the princess to be. I think that she forgave her father at the dinner party. And a lot of places have it that she married the prince and she lived happily ever after, and that was the end of it, except for one. And this is what I think happened in that one story. The prince turned to her, he said, let's get married. And she said, no, I don't want to marry you. Forget you. I want to marry him. She pointed to the servant, the one who helped her in the woods and saved her life. And the prince said, you can't marry him. He's a servant. And she said, so was I. And when I was a servant, nobody noticed me at all. And he was nice to me, and I liked him. So she took her father by one hand. She took her future husband by the other hand. And she went off out the door. And I think that they lived happily ever after, still in the magical dresses that came out of that tree. And that everything worked out right for them in the end. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Dawn. Dawn Wood, her unusual take on stories. Our next teller is Lori Pines. She is a longtime member of South Bay Storytellers and Listeners, one willing to do any job. She is an accomplished and gracious MC. I've learned a lot from her. Lori has traveled the world as a Peace Corps volunteer. Everywhere she goes, she shares stories. Tonight, she will share The Quilt Maker's Gift. Lori Pines.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandy, for that lovely intro. Once, perhaps not so long ago, in a kingdom, perhaps much like those we have today, high on a mountain there lived a quilt maker. Every day she would sit and sew quilts. They were beautiful, unique in color and design. And when a quilt was finished, she would wait for the evening when the cold winds began to blow. She'd take the quilt and fold it up and walk down the mountain through the streets of the village till she found someone who was poor and needy. And then she would open the quilt and gently wrap it around this person with love and warmth and caring. And then she would return to her house and the next day start sewing another quilt. Now you can imagine that because her quilts were so beautiful, people wanted to buy them. But she would very kindly explain to them that no, they were for the poor and the needy. Now, this kingdom was ruled by a king who was very powerful and very selfish and loved to collect beautiful things. In fact, his palace was full of extraordinary treasures from around the world. Whenever anybody wanted anything or needed anything from him, he would insist on them giving him an exquisite treasure. He would send his armies out looking for more. And yet, none of it made him happy. He never smiled. He was always sad, believing that one day he would find that one treasure that would bring him happiness. Well, one day, one of his soldiers came to him and said, I found out about this quilt maker up on the top of the mountain. She makes beautiful quilts. I want one, said the king. And the soldier said, no, she won't sell them. She won't. They're only for the poor and the needy. We'll see about that, said the king. And he assembled his army and up the mountain they went. He knocked on her door, and when she opened it, he looked at her and said, give me a quilt. And as politely and kindly as she could, she explained to him that no, she could not. Her quilts were only for the poor and the needy. We'll see about that, he said. And he had his army take her down the mountain, and he placed her in a small island in the middle of a big lake. And he said, you stay there, you suffer. I want a quilt. And off he went. It didn't take very long for the cold winds to start blowing, and the quilt maker was very cold and uncomfortable. And then she looked up and she saw a bird trying to fly in the wind, and she held her hand out, and the bird landed on it, and she put the bird on her shoulder, and it was shivering. And from her pocket, she pulled out a scissors and a thread and needle and cut a little piece of her scarf and made a jacket for the bird. Now, back in the palace, it's true, the king was greedy, the king was powerful, but he wasn't mean. And he began to worry about the quilt maker and where he had left her. And so finally he got his army and off they went to the lake to save her. But when they got there, she was no longer on the island. She was sitting high in a tree on the bank, surrounded by birds, and she was sewing a jacket for each one of them. I want a quilt, he said. She said, please, I have an idea. You start giving your treasures away. I will never do that. Please listen to me. You begin to give your treasures away to people who need them, people who will really love them. They don't bring you joy, but with each one you give away, I will begin to sew your quilt. Never, he said, but he had his army take her back to her house. The next morning, he began to think about it, and he searched his palace, and he came up with this little marble that was beautiful. He thought, yeah, I could give that away. And he went out to the streets below looking for someone to give it to. And he came across this young boy who was in rags, looking very sad. And he went up to him and he opened his hand and said, here, this is for you. And the boy looked at it and smiled and laughed and said, oh, thank you. It's beautiful. You've made me so happy. And off he ran. And the king didn't smile, but his mouth began small. And his heart was touched. And he went back to his palace and he began to find other treasures and give them out among his kingdom. And he noticed that how much laughter and how much joy it brought the people. And he himself became happier and happier with each one he gave away. Now, the quilt maker knew about each thing he gave away because the birds would come and tell her. And with each treasure he gave away, she began to sew his quilt. And when he finished giving things to his kingdom, he rode out to other lands and gave these treasures away year after year. And finally, he gave away the last treasure. Oh, he was joyful, he was happy. But with that last treasure, the quilt maker finished his quilt. And she folded it up and walked down the mountain, went to his palace and offered it to him. And he looked at her and said, why? I'm not poor, I'm not needy. Oh, my heart is full of joy. And she looked at him and said, please, I made this for you. And he said, well, actually, I have something for you, so let's trade. And he brought her inside and sat her on his throne. And he said, this is a comfortable place for you to do your sewing. And he had his army take the throne up to her house. And indeed, the quilt maker sat there and sewed her quilts. And every so often, the king would come and sit and watch her sew. And when a quilt was done, it was the king who waited for night when the cold winds began to blow, would take the quilt and fold it up, walk down the mountain, through the village streets, looking for someone who was poor and needy. Open up the quilt and gently wrap it around that person with warmth and love. The Quilt Maker's Gift by Jeff Broombow and Gail DeMarkin. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. What the world needs now is gifts. We thank all of our tellers. Now it's time for our pièce de résistance. Michael D. McCarty is our Southern California connection this year. We have enjoyed conversations with him at conventions at the National Storytelling Conference and appreciate his work using stories as a tool in his activities for making a more just and equitable society. He has told in a great variety of places, from the main stage storytelling festivals to prisons. He has just been named the storytelling gem of the storytelling, the Pacific region of storytelling by the National Storytelling Association. Congratulations, Michael, you are a gem. And so delighted to have Michael as our featured teller this year. Wave a welcome to Michael McCarty.
Hey, 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 greetings and salutations, y'all. Woo, outstanding, outstanding. So I got some stories for y'all. Here we go. This first story is a folktale from a book called Children of Wax by Alexander McCall Smith, and it's called The Blind Man's Bird. Once in a village in the south of Africa, there was a young man and there was a young woman, and they fell in love and they got married. Things were going wonderfully and they kept going wonderfully. The young lady had an older brother who'd been born blind. He and his brother-in-law, they became fast friends. The young man loved to hang out with the blind man, who was very, very wise, very, very wise. One day, the young man said to his blind brother-in-law, "Brother, I'm going to go hunting tomorrow. I'm going to set some traps to catch some birds. Would you like to go with me?" Now, needless to say, no one had ever invited the blind man to go hunting. So he was very excited. So they went marching off and they found an area, and the young man said, brother, I'm gonna set a trap right here. This trap is for you. Whatever bird comes into this trap will be yours. And then he went and set another trap farther off for himself. They left. On the next day, on their way back to check the traps, the blind man was excited. He was sure that they both would have birds in their traps, and he was right. When they got there, oh, the bird that was in the blind man's trap was the most beautiful bird that the young man had ever seen. Feathers every color of the rainbow, just shimmering. The bird that was in the young man's trap, plain old bird, brown bird. What you want? I'm a bird, leave me alone. And then the young man thought, he wanted to give that beautiful bird to his wife. And he thought, the blind man won't know the difference. And he switched the birds. He gave the blind man the plain bird and took the beautiful bird for himself. The blind man took that plain bird, he pet that bird, he rubbed that bird, he listened to that bird. They were walking back to the village in silence. After some time, the young man said, brother, you are so wise. Perhaps you can answer this question for me. Why do men fight with each other? Why do men go to war with each other? And after a few steps, the blind man said, men fight with each other and they go to war with each other because they do to each other what you have just done to me. Busted by the blind man. He couldn't see, but he could hear. He knew that wasn't the same bird. The young man was mortified. He immediately apologized and exchanged the birds, and they walked in silence. After some time, the young man said, brother, how do men make amends when they have wronged each other? And the blind man said, they do what you have just done. They right the wrong. And that is the story of the blind man's bird. Yay. Okay, now, just so you all know who don't know me, I worked, of course, in schools and libraries, but I also work in prisons, California state prisons. Since 2014, I've done story creation workshops in a dozen California prisons. And this is a two-part. It's something I use in my workshop, and there's a story that came out of the workshop. Here we go. In talking to the guys in my class, I talk about seizing the chalk. Now, let me explain that to you. There's a movie, Hidden Figures, about Black women who were involved in the space programs, particularly this one particular woman. And she was, as a very young child, brilliant with math, to the point where she was raised in the South. There was no adequate education or schooling in her area. The teachers at her school raised money so her parents could send her to another town that had a school that would accept Black kids to 8th grade in high school. So she's this little tiny thing. She's sitting on a chair with all these older kids. And the instructor comes up to her and says, Catherine, there was a quadratic equation on the board. Catherine, why don't you show us how to solve this quadratic equation? And she's this little tiny thing. She scoops her little glasses up on her nose and takes a piece of chalk and goes up there and solves the heck out of that equation. Later on in the movie, while they're trying to figure out how to get John Glenn down, there's another opportunity where she seizes the chalk. And I talk in my class about seizing an opportunity when it comes your way. And this is one of the things that came from one of the guys in one of my classes. So this man was in prison. He had a sentence of something like 35 to life for a non-violent crime. And he swore he was innocent. He couldn't afford a lawyer, so he had a public defender. They'd gone to court and he wasn't happy because the public defender wasn't defended. So they're having an argument, and finally, in frustration, he says, look, man, I don't want to see you no more. You're fired. the public defender starts laughing. He says, "What are you laughing at?" He says, "You can't fire me. You didn't hire me. I was appointed. See you in court." Well, this man, this Black man, who I was told did not have a 6th grade education, went to the law library. He went to the law library and fired that public defender. He found out how to do it and fired his butt. Part 2, he became his own attorney. Now, as his own attorney, he has all his legal paperwork and what have you, and he goes to court and he loses his mind. He's in there, he's acting all bad, he's cussing at people, he's cussing at the judge, he's calling the prosecutor a racist, and the judge had the presence of mind to say, "Look, you lost your mind. I'm gonna give you a break. You need to," I'm paraphrasing now, "you need to chill out." So during that break, he realized he had acted a complete and utter fool. To calm himself, he started going through his paperwork. And one of the things that he realized in going through his paperwork is that the prosecutor had been withholding information from the judge to make his case easier. So he gets himself together, he goes back into the court. The first thing he does, he apologizes to the judge, to the prosecutor, and to the jury. And then he says, matter of factly, "Oh, by the way, Your Honor, it seems that the prosecutor has neglected to provide you with some necessary information." And the judge was like, "What?" To make a long story shorter, he got the case thrown out. And he was in my class last year, and he was hoping to get out by Christmas if he took these classes, but he was getting his GED, and the last GED class he had to take, the test he had to take, was the math class, and he was scared. He was absolutely scared, to the point where he was going to ignore taking that until later on. This was eliminating the possibility of him getting out earlier, like November or December. He was going to take the test in January. I gave a handout in one of the classes that talked about seizing the chalk, seizing opportunities. And this particular morning, he got up and he saw this paper that had this information. He said, "Man, I'm gonna take this test." He took that test, he passed that test, he got out, he is out. He seized the chalk. We all have those opportunities. They come around in our lives. When it comes, seize that chalk. And that's the end of that. So I got at least one more story for you, maybe two, we'll see. This next one is a very, this is a very personal story, and you all are my premiere for this particular story in a formal setting. I call this story Flame On. And here we go. In February, I go to the VA for my health care primarily. And in February, the end of February, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So in March or so, I started meeting with the physician and we started talking about how to approach it. And the first doctor I spoke with gave me basically two options: surgery, radiation. Well, I chose surgery. I'd had some surgery for this before, and it seemed like the more direct route. Okay, fine. So we set a date in June. So I show up at the VA, 5:30 in the morning, bright and early. I'm sitting about 7 o'clock in my room, waiting to get wheeled down to get anesthesia, when in come my three surgeons. Now, I mentioned one surgeon, he was the junior surgeon. Now I'm with the junior surgeon and the two senior surgeons. And of the two senior surgeons, there's a senior surgeon. Okay, They come into my room and they're like, at first I think they're just there to talk to me about everything, wish me well and what have you, but they got something on their mind. And one of the surgeons says, we need some more chairs, because there was only one chair. So they sat down and they started talking to me. The senior surgeon says to me, I woke up at 2:30 this morning with your case in my head, and I realized two things. One, he had talked to me about a possible complication because of that previous surgery that I'd had. Now, he implied that, or he said that because of this complication, there was a possibility that I could end up incontinent for the rest of my life. But the way he said it was in a way that, I got to tell you this, but don't worry about it. I got this. All right. So I'm thinking, okay, fine. And then the other thing they mentioned to me is that, well, after the surgery, we'll have to do this, we'll have to do that. And they're talking about all the things that are coming up. But the surgeon is intent. The other thing that he forgot is that he didn't give me another option. The other option was a possibility of not surgery, but a combination of radiation and hormone therapy. And I said, okay, fine, because they are looking at me and they obviously do not want to do this surgery. So if they don't want to do it, I don't want them to do it. So I agree. And they say, okay, fine. You can go home now, or we can start the hormone therapy this morning. And I said, well, I'm already here, fine. So they go and I go. And one of the things I found out as I was leaving, I got dressed and I was leaving, I still know how to skip. Because I was skipping along, I'm not having surgery, I'm not having surgery, I'm not gonna have a catheter, yeah. So we start the treatments that day. So this is June or so, and a few months go by. Now, the morning that they started me on a hormone therapy, I know they talked to me about all the possible complications and what have you, but I was so happy, I don't remember none of that stuff. So now, a few months later, I go in, it's at the end of September, I go in to see a doctor in the urology department. She comes and gets me from the waiting room, and we're walking back to her office when she says to me, so, how are the hot flashes? Oh my God. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm going through hormone therapy. They're giving me estrogen. I'm having hot flashes. Your personal summer, I'm having that stuff going on. I'm having that, and I'm having all kinds of emotions. I'm very emotional, what have you. All this stuff is going, but because I don't remember them telling me about this, I just think I'm going crazy or I got COVID and I'm dying. So when she says to me, so how are the hot flashes? It was such a relief. It was such a relief. I'm not, yes, I am crazy, but I'm not crazy like that. And this whole experience has been intriguing. It's been funny because it's given me this really, really great story. And we have fun at the hospital when I go in for my treatments and my radiation. We have a ball. Some of you who know me know I give out these little kind of cards and what have you. We have a great time. But I got to tell you one thing about the hot flashes and the emotions. I was doing the storytelling festival in Tennessee in September. Now, just so you know, we didn't go out. They filmed us and they showed the film at the schools and drive-in theaters and what have you. But I'm an emotional guy. Those of you who know me know I'm a very emotional. Now I get I was with my daughter first in Chicago before going to Tennessee, and my brother had passed. We're talking, remember him and dealing with that and having emotions. But I'm in Tennessee with the other storytellers, most of whom I knew, some of whom I just met, and all of a sudden we're talking. I'm bursting into tears and what have you. And again, once she told me, or rather she asked me that question, it all made sense. When I informed my wife and my daughter about this, they both just laughed. And my wife said, now you know. And that's my story of my flaming on. And that's the end of that. Okay, I got one last story for you, and it's, I think, apropos, and you'll figure it out too. This is an oldie and a greatie. I call this story The Power of Love. It was sometime in the 80s, and I was traveling around the south of India, going to temples and ashram and getting my spiritual groove on. Me and some friends, we'd gone to Pondicherry to visit the Sri Aurobindo ashram in a place called Agra. We got there and my two friends went directly to the main ashram hotel, the Park Guest House. I wanted to roam the town a little bit. I wasn't worried about getting a room. It was the hot season in the south of India. That meant it's like 115, 120 degrees. And according to the guidebook, you didn't have to worry about getting a room at the Park Guest House, the main ashram hotel, because nobody in their right mind would be there but me and my friends. So after roaming the town a little bit, I go to the hotel. I'm walking up the steps to the lobby, and this elderly Indian woman gives me a real dirty look, and she says something to the man sitting behind the desk. I walk up, he says, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, I'd like a room." "We don't have any rooms." Keys all over the board, up, down, and sideways. I said, "Well, did so-and-so and so-and-so check in?" Asking about my two friends who just happened to be white. He said, "Yes." Now I'm picking up on something, duh. But I don't want to believe what I'm picking up on because I'm an ashram, a spiritual kind of place. But I maintain my spiritual cool. I go check into another hotel. The next morning, I'm having breakfast with my friends at the Park Guest House hotel restaurant. And there's another guy I know who had checked into the hotel after I'd been by there the previous day. Now, I maintain a positive attitude. Some rooms must have suddenly become available. So I go to the lobby, and there's that woman, the one who'd given me the dirty look, checking some people in. And I'm standing, waiting for her to take care of her business. And she looks at me and says, "What do you want?" With attitude. And I said, "I came to see if you had any rooms available." "No, we don't have any rooms. And this isn't just some hotel. This is for people who are coming for the Sri Aurobindo ashram. Like I'm halfway around the world and I don't know this." Now I am PO'd. I've had enough of this town. I had enough of this ashram. I make arrangements to leave the following day. The next morning, I'm going to have breakfast with my friends at the Park Guest House Hotel, only place in town with whole wheat toast. I'm a whole wheat toast kind of guy. And I am barred from entering the restaurant, told that I have to go get this woman's permission to go in. Now you're talking to your former 60s militant type. I know how to yell, scream, and cuss and fuss. Ain't done it in a while, but I still remember how. But I maintain a spiritual attitude. I go to the lobby. The woman was sitting behind the desk. I said, "Madam, is there some problem? I'm just going to have breakfast with my friends in a restaurant. I was just in there yesterday. May I go in?" "No, you wait in the lobby." "Oh, it's on now." I'm getting ready to go Chicago on her. I'm getting ready to raise all kind of cane. As I'm working myself up to do this, a voice in my head says, "This is a test. It's easy to love those that love you. The test is to love those that hate you." And I figure this woman qualifies. Now you must understand that love was not uppermost in my mind in terms of things I wanted to send her. I can think of a hot, fiery place I would love to have seen her go. With some people in the political realm, that's another story. But I maintain my spiritual cool. Nah, no, I didn't. Ooh, what am I? And then I remember something that I'd reading that pink was the color that represented divine love. And I thought we definitely needed some divine love up in here. So mentally, I enveloped her in this bubble of pink light, and I started pumping pink at her butt. I was pumping pink, I was pumping pink, I was pumping pink. I worked up a sweat pumping pink. All of a sudden, the woman comes over, totally different demeanor, totally different tone of voice. are your friends in the restaurant? I'm from Chicago, we'd be suspicious. I'm looking around like, what, am I getting set up? What's going on? But she was real. She says, let me escort you. And she personally escorted me into the restaurant. And as I walked into the restaurant and I looked back at her, smiling sweetly, I realized I had experienced the power of love. When I became a professional storyteller, this is one of the stories I told at Community Storytellers, one of the first stories I told there. And after the meeting, one friend was especially excited by the story, inspired by the story. A few months later, after the same meeting, she says, Michael, let me tell you what happened. It seemed that at her job, her boss had made it her personal business to give my friend unholy hell each and every day. This particular day, my friend decided she was going to do the pink thing. She would envelop her and send her love. If not love, she would send her like. If not like, she wouldn't send those, I want to choke you around your neck thoughts. You do the best you can. So she'd been doing that all morning. At lunch, all the employees were sitting in the little lunchroom. My friend was sitting here talking to someone. The boss was sitting next to her talking to someone else. And then the boss turned to her and engaged her in pleasant, complimentary conversation. And from that day on, there was no more mess between them. The power of love. The power of love. I think that we are in a time when we definitely need the power of love. Now, usually at this point, this is where I stop the story, but I'm gonna give y'all some homework. Send somebody some love. Do the pink thing. Do the pink thing. I told this story in around 1994 at a juvenile facility in New York City. And after my presentation, one of the counselors said to one of the boys, these are all high school boys, what do you think about what he said about the power of love? And he thought for a minute, he said, I think I'm going to give it a try. What more could I ask? The power of love. Spread some love, y'all. And by the way, I'm sending love to all of y'all. And that is the show enough end of this. Thank you. Whee!
Hey, thank you, Michael. And thanks to all our tellers, Joy Swift, Anushka Shetty, Tricia Shetty, JC Cockrell, Becky Blythe, Don Wood, Lori Pines, and your hosts, Tom and Sandy Farley. And thank you for joining South Bay Storytellers and the Storytelling Association of California for this Tellabration. And thanks to Shags, Stephen Chagrin from the Storytelling Association of California. Check the SAC website. There's 2 more Tellabrations tomorrow. You can register for them the same place you registered for this one and go hear more stories, because what the world needs now is stories.
Amen.
Yeah.